A slip of the tongue in a department store became a top 10 hit. A 6-minute album track nobody planned to release became a #1 single. And 3 days before he died, a singer left a whistled placeholder on a song he never got to finish.
Say it loud! Let me hear you!
12 records, one turbulent, unforgettable year. This is Groove Lens, and this is the sound that carried America through 1968. Let's count them down. Number 12, Cowboys to Girls by The Intruders. Before Philadelphia soul had a name, it had this song. Kenny Gamble and Leon Huff had already scored one hit together, Expressway to Your Heart, for the soul survivors. But Cowboys to Girls was the record that proved their sound could carry a group all the way to #1. The Intruders had been together since 1960, grinding through Philadelphia's doo-wop scene for the better part of a decade with only modest regional success. Lead singer Sam "Little Sonny" Brown had a smoky, distinctive voice that Gamble and Huff built the entire arrangement around. Lush strings, a gentle rhythm section, and a lyric about growing up and trading childhood games for romance. Released in early 1968 on Gamble's own fledgling label, the song became the Intruders' first R&B #1 and climbed all the way to #6 on the pop chart, instantly making it the biggest hit of the group's career. It also became something bigger than just a hit for one group. It was proof of concept for an entire sound. The template Gamble and Huff would refine over the next few years into what the world would eventually call the Philadelphia sound. Within a few years, that same partnership would go on to build Philadelphia International Records, one of the most successful soul labels of the 1970s. But it all traces back to this one record. 4 guys from North Philly who'd been waiting a decade for their moment, walking away with the biggest hit of their lives on a brand new label that hadn't even released anything else yet. Number 11, Stay in My Corner by the Dells. This song had already failed once. The Dells first recorded Stay in My Corner back in 1965 for VJ Records, and it limped to a modest number 23 on the R&B chart before disappearing entirely. By 1968, VJ itself had gone bankrupt, and the Dells had moved on to Chess Records' Cadet imprint, ready to try again. Producer Bobby Miller and arranger Charles Stepney reworked the song from scratch, bringing in string players from the Chicago Symphony Orchestra to build something far more lush and cinematic than the original. Nobody involved expected it to be a single. It ran over 6 minutes long, an unthinkable length for radio in 1968, and was only intended as an album track buried on their record There Is. Then something unusual happened. Radio stations started playing the full 6-minute album cut anyway, and the demand grew so large that Chess made an almost unheard-of decision. They released the entire 6-minute version as a 45 single. Length restrictions be damned. It worked. Stay in My Corner spent 3 weeks at #1 on the R&B chart and crossed into the pop top 10, becoming the biggest hit of the Dells' remarkably long career, a group that had been singing together since 1954 and would go on performing together for decades more.
Just a kiss from you.
The Dells were touring Europe when the news reached them, and by their own account, they were as surprised as anyone that a song they'd already watched fail once had finally found its moment. It's a rare case of a genuine underdog story inside the music business itself. Not an unknown artist breaking through, but a proven song getting a second chance nobody thought it needed, and turning out to be exactly what listeners wanted all along. Number 10, I Second That Emotion by Smokey Robinson and the Miracles. This song exists because of a mistake. In the final weeks of 1967, Smokey Robinson was Christmas shopping at a Detroit department store with his friend and fellow songwriter Al Cleveland, picking out a set of pearls for his wife Claudette. I sure hope she likes them, Robinson told the salesperson. Cleveland meant to reply, I second that motion, the common phrase people use to back up an idea, but what came out instead was, I second that emotion. Both men burst out laughing at the slip, but Robinson, whose entire songwriting career was built on finding clever twists inside ordinary phrases, immediately recognized what he was hearing. By the time they left the store, they'd already agreed it was the title of a song. They wrote it that same day, built around a narrator refusing to settle for a fling when he wants real devotion. Motown head Berry Gordy trimmed an entire third verse to keep the runtime radio-friendly, a change Robinson accepted without much resistance, trusting Gordy's instincts on what would actually get played. Released in the fall of 1967 and climbing the charts into early 1968, I Second That Emotion became the Miracles' first #1 R&B hit under their newly rebranded name, Smokey Robinson and the Miracles, and one of the most enduring songs in the entire Motown catalog, all sparked by a friend fumbling a common phrase in a jewelry aisle. I second that emotion. It's one of Robinson's cleanest examples of what made him such a revered lyricist in the first place. He didn't need drama or heartbreak to build a classic. He just needed to be listening closely enough to notice when an accident was actually a gift. Or maybe you think that love was made for food. Number 9, Grazing in the Grass by Hugh Masekela. Hugh Masekela wasn't trying to make a hit record. He was a South African trumpeter living in exile, having fled his home country as apartheid closed in, eventually landing in New York and Los Angeles, among the era's biggest jazz names. In 1968, working on his third album for the Uni label, his producer Stuart Levine realized they were 3 minutes short of the contractually required runtime. Levine remembered a novelty single Masekela had picked up years earlier on a trip to Zambia, an obscure cowbell-driven tune called Mr. Bull No. 5. They reworked it into an instrumental in under an hour, treating it as pure filler, nothing more than a way to pad out the album and move on. An actor and musician named Philemon Who happened to be in the studio that day, came up with the melody line and ended up as the song's sole credited writer. Nobody expected much from it. Then the label's own executive heard the finished track and declared it an instant smash. He was right. Grazing in the Grass shot to #1 on the pop chart in July of 1968, beating out the Rolling Stones for the top spot, and made Masekela the first South African artist ever to top the American charts. An astonishing outcome for a song built in under an hour, purely to satisfy a contract. It sold 4 million copies worldwide, becoming one of the defining instrumental hits of the era, and forever tied to a man who'd been forced out of his own country and found, halfway around the world, that the world was ready to dance to something built from a piece of home he'd carried with him. Number 8, Chain of Fools by Aretha Franklin. This song almost went to a different singer entirely. Atlantic producer Jerry Wexler asked songwriter Don Covey to come up with new material for Otis Redding, and Covey dusted off an old melody he'd written as a teenager singing gospel with his brothers and sisters back in the early 1950s. He recorded a rough demo of himself alone with a guitar, overdubbing his own harmonies. When Covey played that demo for Wexler in his office, Wexler had a different idea entirely. This wasn't a song for Otis Redding. This was a song for Aretha Franklin. It recorded in June of 1967 with the same team behind her other hits, the Muscle Shoals rhythm section, King Curtis on saxophone, her sisters Carolyn and Irma on backing vocals. Chain of Fools opens with one of the most recognizable tremolo guitar licks in soul music, courtesy of guitarist Joe South, before Franklin's voice enters like a verdict already decided. The song describes a woman trapped in a relationship she knows is doomed, sticking with it anyway. Franklin's own sister Carolyn later put it plainly. Aretha didn't write it, but she might as well have. It was her story, drawn straight from her own difficult marriage. Released in late 1967 and holding #1 on the R&B chart for 4 weeks into 1968, it won Franklin a Grammy and became one more link in the extraordinary chain of hits that made her the undisputed queen of soul. It's a small irony worth sitting with. A song written by a man decades earlier, offered first to a different singer entirely, that ended up capturing Aretha Franklin's real life more precisely than almost anything she'd written herself. Most people scrolling past these songs today have no idea what it actually took to make them. The failed first attempts, the songs written for someone else entirely, the tracks nobody expected to become singles at all. Groove Lens digs that history back up, one record at a time. If that's worth your time, hit subscribe. It costs nothing, and it means you won't miss the next one. Number 7, Tighten Up by Archie Bell and the Drells. This one has a strange, almost impossible backstory. Tighten Up was built on a groove developed by a Houston backing band called the TSU Tornadoes, who brought it to Archie Bell and his group at a local disc jockey's suggestion.
Tighten it up now. Oh, yeah. Now everybody tighten up. Come on.
They recorded it in August 1967, a loose, funky jam with Bell casually introducing himself and his hometown right at the top of the track. It became a regional hit in Houston before Atlantic Records picked it up for national distribution.
Now, I said we got a new dance now.
Here's the twist. Shortly after that recording session, Archie Bell was drafted into the United States Army during the Vietnam War era. By the time Tighten Up reached #1 on both the R&B and pop charts in the spring of 1968, Bell wasn't home celebrating. He was serving overseas, listening to his own voice dominate American radio from thousands of miles away. He was injured during his service, though not in combat as legend later exaggerated. The actual injury came in a truck accident while he was stationed in Germany.
All right now, we're gonna make it mellow one time now. Ready?
The Rock and Roll Hall of Fame later recognized it as the only #1 hit by an active Vietnam-era soldier in music history.
Come on and tighten it up now. All right.
Back home, the rest of the Drells kept touring with a stand-in, taking Bell's place on stage, unable to fully celebrate the biggest hit of their lives without the man whose voice had made it. It's remembered today as one of the earliest funk records ever made, and one of the strangest instances of stardom, arriving while the star himself was stationed a world away.
Now let that guitar fall in now. Come on. Oh, yeah.
Number 6, I Wish It Would Rain by The Temptations.
With her went my future. My life is filled with...
This is one of the more heartbreaking stories in Motown's history. The lyrics were written by staff songwriter Roger Penzabene, working alongside producer Norman Whitfield and Barrett Strong, and they weren't fiction.
gloom. So day after day, I stay.
In the spring of 1967, Penzabene discovered his wife had been unfaithful, and unable to fully process the betrayal, he poured every bit of it into this song. A man so devastated by heartbreak that he wishes for rain, just so the falling drops might hide his tears from the world.
Everyone knows that a man ain't supposed to cry. Listen.
David Ruffin took the lead vocal, delivering it with a raw, aching conviction that few singers of the era could match, turning another man's private pain into one of the most affecting ballads Motown ever released. The song entered the charts in December of 1967 and climbed to #1 on the R&B chart in February 1968, becoming the 7th of an eventual 15 R&B chart toppers for the Temptations.
No pain, my eyes search the skies.
Tragically, Penzabene did not live to see that peak. Just 10 days after the single's release, on New Year's Eve 1967, he took his own life, still unable to reconcile with the pain that had inspired the lyrics.
Never explain, I just wish it would rain.
The Temptations released one more Penzabene pen song afterward, I Could Never Love Another, continuing the same story from a different angle.
Blue skies, please go away.
Whitfield and the group would soon move toward a completely different, more psychedelic sound, but I Wish It Would Rain remains a quiet, devastating reminder of the real heartbreak that sometimes sits underneath even the most polished Motown productions.
A girl has found another and gone.
Number 5, Who's Making Love by Johnny Taylor.
What I'm gonna ask.
Johnny Taylor hated this song when producer Don Davis brought him Who's Making Love, written by the Stax songwriting team of Homer Banks, Betty Crutcher, Don Davis, and Raymond Jackson. Taylor reportedly dismissed it outright, calling it the Boogity Boogity song and pushing back against recording it at all. Davis insisted anyway.
Making love, giving up. Now who's making love?
The timing could not have mattered more. Stax Records was in genuine crisis in 1968. The label's biggest star, Otis Redding, had died in a plane crash the previous December, and Stax's longtime distribution deal with Atlantic Records had just collapsed, leaving the label suddenly independent and stripped of most of its biggest acts, who stayed contractually tied to Atlantic. Stax needed a hit, badly, and needed one fast.
It's made to be beat up.
Taylor's reluctant vocal, delivered over a driving, jumpy rhythm and a lyric about hypocrisy and double standards, became exactly that hit. Who's Making Love reached #1 on the R&B chart and climbed to #5 on the pop chart, becoming the best-selling single in Stax's history up to that point, and effectively saving the label during its most vulnerable stretch.
I'm not trying to run your life. Yours is up.
Despite his initial resistance, Johnny Taylor was suddenly a star. The singer Stax execs began grooming as their answer to the void Redding's death had left behind. He'd go on to a decades-long career, eventually scoring an even bigger hit with Disco Lady in the 1970s. But it all started with a song he actively didn't want to record.
Why you lie? She knows.
Taylor had already spent nearly 2 decades in music by that point, having once replaced Sam Cooke in the gospel group The Soul Stirrers before going secular. It took a song he hated to finally make him a household name. Number 4, Say It Loud, I'm Black and I'm Proud by James Brown.
Say it loud!
4 months after the assassination of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., James Brown walked into Vox Studios in Los Angeles with an idea he'd been sitting with for a while, a song built entirely around a call-and-response chant, one that could turn a single word into a statement of collective pride.
Sure, they take 2 eyes to make a pair. We can't give up.
Rather than record it with his usual band alone, Brown brought in roughly 30 young people from the Watts and Compton neighborhoods of Los Angeles and had them answer his call of Say It Loud with the response that gave the song its title.
So tough, you're tough enough.
That unrehearsed, youthful energy is part of what makes the recording feel less like a polished single and more like a genuine gathering, a room full of people saying something out loud together for the first time. Brown later explained his intentions plainly. He wanted young black kids to feel proud of who they were, and he wanted the wider country to understand, without ambiguity, exactly how Black America felt in that moment. It wasn't meant to divide, it was meant to be heard. Released in the late summer of 1968, Say It Loud spent 6 weeks at #1 on the R&B chart and became one of the most significant, most quoted songs of the entire civil rights era, later credited by figures like Chuck D of Public Enemy as the moment they stopped accepting old labels and started defining themselves on their own terms. It cost Brown some of his crossover pop audience at the time, but it gave an entire generation something to say out loud together. Number 3, You're All I Need to Get By Marvin Gaye and Tammy Terrell. By the time Marvin Gaye and Tammy Terrell recorded this song, their partnership already carried a weight the public didn't fully understand yet. In October of 1967, Terrell had collapsed on stage into Gaye's arms during a concert, later diagnosed with a malignant brain tumor. She underwent surgery and kept recording anyway, determined not to let it end things between them. Written by the husband and wife team of Nicholas Ashford and Valerie Simpson, You're All I Need to Get By leaned into gospel rather than the polished Motown formula the label was known for, built around a New York church choir and the writer's own backing vocals.
I'll do my best, stand by it like a tree.
Listen closely to the finished track, and you can hear Gaye gently coaxing Terrell through her lines, encouraging her with quiet ad-libs of, "Come on, Tammy," as she pushed through a performance her body was actively fighting against. Released in the summer of 1968, the song became their most successful duet, spending 5 weeks at #1 on the R&B chart and reaching the pop top 10. It sits alongside their other 1968 chart topper, Ain't Nothing Like the Real Thing, as the peak of one of soul music's most beloved partnerships. Terrell would perform with Gaye only a handful more times before her death in March 1970, less than 2 years later. This song, recorded through surgery and recovery, remains one of the most quietly devastating true stories in all of Motown's catalog. A plea for togetherness, sung by two people who both already sensed how little time they had left.
Stand by it like a tree, and anybody to
Number 2, I Heard It Through the Grapevine by Marvin Gaye.
how I knew I'll choke man.
This was Marvin Gaye's third attempt at a song that almost never saw daylight. Motown writers Norman Whitfield and Barrett Strong first gave the song to Smokey Robinson and the Miracles in 1966, but label boss Berry Gordy rejected it outright.
Heard it through the grapevine. Oh,
Whitfield brought Gaye in to record it next, but Gordy turned that version down too, unconvinced it was strong enough to release.
now yesterday, don't you know that I heard?
Whitfield refused to let it go. He gave the song a third life with Gladys Knight and the Pips instead, and that version finally reached #1 on the R&B chart in late 1967, becoming the best-selling single in Motown's history at that point.
These tears I can't hold inside.
Vindicated, Whitfield pushed Gordy to finally release Gaye's original version, which had been sitting on the shelf the entire time.
You're here, but I can't help it.
When it finally came out in October 1968, Gaye's take didn't just match Knight's success, it obliterated it. I Heard It Through the Grapevine spent the final 3 weeks of 1968 at #1 on the R&B chart, on its way to becoming the biggest-selling single in Motown's history, surpassing even Knight's version and eventually coming to be regarded as the definitive recording of the song.
Before, don't you know I heard it through the
There's real irony in the timing. The exact same year opened with Gladys Knight's version still sitting at #1 from 1967, and it closed with Marvin Gaye's version finally claiming the top spot after 2 full years of being told it wasn't good enough. Sometimes the industry gets it wrong twice before finally getting it right. Number 1. Sittin' on the Dock of the Bay by Otis Redding. Otis Redding began writing this song in the summer of 1967 while staying on a houseboat in Sausalito, California, watching the water and letting a rare stillness settle over what had always been a high-energy, shouting soul sound. Working with guitarist Steve Cropper, he built something gentler than anything he'd released before, a song about simply sitting still and watching time pass. He recorded it across 2 sessions, the final one on December 7, 1967. He hadn't finished writing the last verse yet, so he whistled a placeholder melody instead, fully intending to come back to Stax Studios and replace it with real lyrics once he had the words worked out. He never got the chance. 3 days later, on December 10, 1967, the small plane carrying Redding and most of his backing band crashed into the icy waters of Lake Monona near Madison, Wisconsin. Only one person on board survived. Otis Redding was 26 years old. Released the following January, still carrying that unfinished whistled ending, Sittin' on the Dock of the Bay became Redding's first ever #1 hit on both the R&B and pop charts, and the first posthumous #1 in the history of the Hot 100. What was meant to be a placeholder, a rough sketch waiting to be finished, became instead the most iconic ending in his entire catalog, immortalized permanently by the fact that he never got the chance to change it. It sold over 8 million copies worldwide and remains, more than half a century later, one of the most beloved songs in American music. The sound of a man planning to come back and finish something, forever caught in the moment, just before he ran out of time.